Hi, I'm Margaret Fox, editor here at Stratfor, and with me today is our Vice President of Intelligence, Fred Burton, to talk to us a little bit about the attack on Benghazi in 2012. So Fred, last week was the anniversary of the attack and the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens. You yourself served in the Diplomatic Security Service for a time, and presumably Stevens himself had DSS agents protecting him. Could you give us a little bit of an insight into what those agents were going through when the attack happened? What were they trained to do?
Well, they're trained to cover and evacuate, which is exactly what they did. You're basically trained through basic agent school to get the protectee and remove them to a safe haven and wait for help. And that's exactly what the agents did.
Despite the fact that they went ahead and executed their training, unfortunately they weren't able to save the ambassador at that time. There's been plenty of ink spilt on the topic of what went wrong. Some people think there wasn't enough security at the time. Some people think somebody messed up. Do you have any thoughts on the subject?
Well, first, Margaret, I think it's so easy to second guess and criticize, which everybody's bound to do in these kinds of events. But I investigated the last United States ambassador killed in the line of duty in 1988 before Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi. And I know what it's like to be placed in these extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And certainly I had never experienced anything that these agents had to in Benghazi. But you can only imagine what they're living through at the time, not knowing that this kind of event is going to unfold. And then once it starts to unfold, you're dealing literally with a life and death situation. So people have no idea how quickly things go to hell in a handbasket, to be blunt.
Mm-hmm. So kind of what you're saying is, you've been in those situations before, and it's not really helpful to be pointing fingers in the aftermath. And yet that's exactly what happened, right?
Well, the politics of Benghazi, in essence, there's two narratives to Benghazi. There's what happened, and then there's a politics surrounding Benghazi. And what we tried to do with our book Under Fire was lay out the facts for the reader to come to their own conclusion as to what took place. The one takeaway that I think is important is that this was a terrorist attack, and it was known to be a terrorist attack within 90 seconds. And rest assured that the agents that were there under fire knew that this was a terrorist attack when the first round was fired.
So you mentioned right there that in your book, Under Fire, you kind of just lay out the facts for the reader to take at face value and sort of form their own conclusions. But in the piece that you wrote for Stratfor last week, you actually had some pretty strong opinions about what we should do going forward. Could you talk a little bit more about how you think the State Department can recover gracefully from this event?
Well, I think tragedy always forces change, and bureaucracies don't change until there's literally embassies lying in rubble or horrific events which unfolded like in Benghazi. And the State Department has moved forward. They've put more agents into the ranks. Not enough in my assessment.
Really?
When you compare it to like the U.S. Secret Service or the FBI and you look at the mission. Mm-hmm. The State Department has also increased the Marine Security Guard presence with additional detachments around the globe. But one of the more important bureaucratic changes that needs to take place, which hasn't, is that they need to create an undersecretary for diplomatic security, or they need to create a director for diplomatic security, very similar to the FBI or U.S. Secret Service model.
How does that compare to what they have now?
Right now, they have an assistant secretary for diplomatic security that is buried below a flow chart under the Management Bureau inside of state. And this is something that it's always been in that kind of format, and the Foreign Service is very reluctant to change.
Okay.
So I'm not optimistic that things won't change strategically for the Diplomatic Security Service until they elevate the position to an undersecretary, or they create a director that's very similar for the viewers to understand, like the FBI director has or the U.S. Secret Service director has.
What difference does that make, having someone? Is that just because then they'll be closer to the Secretary of State themselves?
Exactly. Okay. It's because you're going to take out the bureaucracy, so in the event of fast-breaking events, you can very quickly get to the Secretary of State. But more importantly, that undersecretary or that director can get in the front of these kinds of decisions and say, hey, is it really smart for us to be in Benghazi to begin with? Or, like right now, the State Department has opened up a location in Mogadishu,
Another high-risk
another
area,
high-risk location that's very, very critical, that the agents that are out there have all the tools in the protection toolbox that they have at their disposal to assure that the diplomats are thoroughly and adequately protected.
Got it. So it sounds like there are some very deep internal reforms that have to happen in the organization, and on top of just adding more security.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And remember, there's a boom and bust cycle that we've written about historically here at Stratfor when it comes to security funding for problems. Washington loves throwing a lot of money at an agency whenever there's a disaster, but more importantly, they really need to have the bureaucratic shifts in order for the State Department security apparatus to be able to do their job. And that hasn't happened yet.
So 3 years on, and it still seems like there's a lot of work for the State Department to do. It's a challenging issue.
No doubt.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts.
My
Fred,
pleasure.
Always very insightful. And thank you so much for watching. For more on this and other topics, please do visit our website at stratfor.com.